KnockBack, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to KnockBack. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined, as always, by my brother, Dagan, goddamn El Dorado Moriarty. Dagan, how are you, my friend?
I knew you were going for that one.
I had to give a shout out to Victor Sullivan.
You have to do the Sully thing.
Of course.
Look at the mind meld after 4 years. I know exactly what you're going to... I usually don't know exactly what you're going to say. I got lucky this time.
Yeah, well, a broken clock is right twice a day, as they say.
Dagan,
how are you? How are you, my friend? How's everything going in your life?
Everything's good. Everything's good. I just got back from my constitutional. I think I told you earlier in the week, I'm going on 2 walks a day now.
Yeah, right.
Just get the blood circulating, get my eyeballs, my peepers away from this computer monitor for a little bit. Oh. Right. So I go on like usually.
Sure.
Usually I do a 20-minute walk, maybe a 25-minute walk, and I try to do it twice a day. We have the hiking. I shouldn't call them hiking trails. They're walking trails in the neighborhood that sort of snake through.
You're doing like Nathan Drake up the mountain.
Well, it just so happens that a tree fell across the path. It's been windy here, and I had to do a little parkour.
Oh, nice.
And it was, when I say a little parkour, I mean it was a very little parkour, and still I think pulled the groin muscle. But you know what I was going to talk to you about? This is the craziest thing. I think I've thought about this my whole life and never talked about this with anybody before, but you may be able to relate. So I go on these walks, and there's been a lot of precipitation in the area, Pennsylvania, raining, snowing, ground's muddy, all that sort of thing. So, and we live in a pretty rural pocket. We live kind of in between suburbia and straight up farmland and vineyards and stuff. Closer to the farmland, you know what it looks like. It's pretty rural back here. So
it is. And
the woods, pretty big swath of woods encircles the neighborhood. So I see animal prints in the mud, right? You see deer, see raccoon, plenty of squirrels, maybe see an occasional fox print in the mud. I was a Boy Scout, so I can identify all that stuff, Kyle.
Wow.
But what I noticed a couple of days ago, and they're still there, were bear prints in the mud. Unmistakable. You know what a bear print looks like. They're also very large. Couldn't be anything else. So now we get bears here occasionally. Hasn't happened in years. I think when we've been here 10 years. I think when we first moved in, one of our neighbors had an episode with a bear hanging out up in the fort of her kid's swing set, and they had to come and remove it. It was like a relatively young bear. It was pretty docile. It was not a big thing, but it was kind of scary. You know, you kind of
everyone's lighting it up.
You're on high alert after that. You know what I mean? It's like a bear. That's kind of weird.
Yeah, it's scary.
And we're not used to that coming from Long Island because that wasn't a thing. So, and then there's a tract of land supposedly that reaches out from like behind our neighborhood that extends up to northern Pennsylvania, like to the Poconos. So supposedly especially when they're pressed for food and stuff, we'll see an occasional bear, a mountain lion, which is particularly scary. What else? Coyotes will come down. But I hadn't seen, tell of a bear. There's been no sign of a bear in years. So got these bear prints. I'm walking, taking my little walk at a brisk pace, and my mind just goes into daydream mode about what if I saw a bear? What would I do? Would I try to like climb on like to the baseball backstop? And then I'm thinking like, your old ass isn't getting away from a bear. Like they're proficient climbers, right? Mm-hmm. So all these things, I jump in the lake, whatever it is, right? And my mind is running away with me. It's just becoming like a waking dream. And I'm just, the scenario's playing out in my head, and my imagination's going crazy. What would I do with this bear? There's a bunch of my neighbors' houses over there on another street, but I don't really know them that well. Which one would I pick? And my mind is just going crazy. And then I snap to probably like 15 minutes later. I get from point B to point F in my walk. Don't remember any of it because I'm too busy daydreaming about this scenario. And then when you snap out of it, it's like waking up from a dream. You realize like you were just going off into this weird fantasy, and then you come back into it and you're like, what was I just doing? Like, what was even the purpose of imagining all that? Because I saw bear prints. Has this happened to you where something will just jar you into like a waking fantasy, and then your imagination runs off and you actually lose track of time and what you're doing. And you're like, whoa, how did I get? Sometimes it happens when you're driving and you're like, whoa, I don't even remember driving the last 6 or 7 miles. I was so off in my own imagination. Can you speak to this, or am I a crazy person?
No,
Or
I
both?
No, well, you are crazy, but I can speak to this for sure. I specifically lose myself on walks with the dogs, and especially when they're being good and I don't have to really worry about them. And then also when I'm working out, I lose track of myself.
Oh, that's a big one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
because you're not doing anything. You're doing physical, but your mental is free to roam.
right.
Right.
You just I'm getting it all out of me. I was just explaining to someone that I feel like I need to do it every day. Like I gotta just like get a lot of energy out because I feel so anxious otherwise. I wake up so anxious. But yeah, I can totally relate to that. Sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't. It's good to lose yourself, and I solve a lot of problems that way too. And I've talked extensively in the past to the audience about I lose myself also in the shower. Where
Oh yes.
and I love thinking in the shower. I just stand there, just like look straight ahead with the water's hitting me, and it's great. It's like
That's
my
a
favorite
big
place.
one for people. I feel like
Yeah.
the shower, they say, I don't, we've talked about this. I don't like long hot showers. And then shaving is the other one that men particularly, that, they would say, I don't know if it's like the electrical circuits so close to my brain, but with the electric shaver, then maybe it's stimulating something.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are big ones. Shower, shaving, working out. That's got to be it's the same, right? That's my workout. You're on the elliptical. I'm out on the
same
walking
thing.
path. Same
Exactly.
thing. Right. So, what about you? What's popping, my friend?
I've been thinking about with all that. I don't like dating our episodes typically, but can't help but think about war this past week because of what's going on in Eastern Europe. And, I've just been thinking about how horrifying it is. And I was telling you that I've had this revelation the last few days as it's been going on, like erupting in Eastern Europe, that it's and I texted you this, that it's the first time in my life that we're like not involved. And it's somehow clarifying for me because I feel really bad about my support of the Iraq war. I don't feel bad about supporting Afghanistan. That was fine. But what was going on in Iraq was ridiculous. And I was very vehemently for it. A lot of people were. And we were in Afghanistan for too long too, but that's a different conflict. But when you're not when you have no association with it, like no real association with it, other than the humanity, the shared humanity that you have between the peoples that are involved in yourself, it, I think, is extra clarifying, as I said, to just reaffirming my just anti-war stance, that it must be the absolute last. It has to be your last choice after everything else is expended. And I think that's what's so disappointing about the situation, is that it's totally unnecessary.
It's craziness.
While I can see, and I totally understand, I've been reading and listening a lot, and I totally get the arguments of like, why is this happening? And why are we being so aggressive? And why is NATO like so close to them? I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Like, all that's fine. And I think we should talk about all of those things.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's pretty scary in 2022 to see an expansionist war waged in the middle of Europe. And
it really
it's not a political take or anything like that, because I'm not like, obviously I want the Ukrainians to win. I mean, I think that's pretty safe for everyone to assume. But I think that the belligerence and the reshaping of the world order is going to be scary. And I don't know if people are going to like what's going to end up happening now. And I think that it has this crazy knock-on effect, not just in Eastern Europe, but just everywhere. And I hope cooler heads prevail, because
amen.
We are on this is the most razor's edge that NATO has ever been on. And I was actually reading, should Russia occupy Eastern Ukraine, we have American soldiers and Russian soldiers miles away from each other because we have them in Poland. So
right.
And then who the fuck knows what happens if they start shooting at each other? I mean, and
it's
the other thing I wanted to say, because we have actually a pretty old audience, which is nice, like old hats, but
yeah,
old heads, but
for sure.
we have a younger audience too.
Yeah.
And I watched what Iraq did to my generation. And it wasn't nearly as bad as what Vietnam did to our dad's generation.
Oh,
Not
good
even
point.
close.
Yeah, good
But
point.
it was bad. I knew a lot of people that went over there. A lot of people fucked up. Like a lot of people my age. I'm 37 now and I've aged out of it. And I think that's why we have to be extra judicious, because it's very easy for people like me now. Now I've aged out.
Yeah,
And nothing short of a Red Dawn situation is going to have me in a military situation. I'm not even being like facetious. That's true.
right.
And so it's very easy for me to pontificate and move young men, typically young, poor and working class men, around a map like risk pieces. And I'm not going to do it. And I
Well
don't want to be
said.
involved in it. And so I hope cooler heads prevail, because
Absolutely. Dude,
I'm a little nervous
absolutely.
about it. You know, I'm a little
It's
nervous about it.
nerve-wracking. It really is. I've spent the better part of like the last 3 weeks really educating myself. I'm very guilty of going through long periods of time without really paying attention to current events the way I should. And so I had to really get myself up to speed. And there's still a lot that I'm confused about or that I don't understand that I'm still clarifying, but I've learned a lot. And the more you learn and educate yourself, obviously, the more frightening it gets. And trying to read into people's personalities and their origins and what their ultimate bent is and all of that, it's fascinating, but it's also really frightening. And yeah, at the end of the day, I think you're right. And I find the older I get too, the more that sentiment of that, the more that anti-war, very strong anti-war sentiment seeps in. It's like that should be the absolute last vestige of action. That should be the actual last go-to. The last thing you go to on the table should be, wasting lives, spending lives, expending lives, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, it's unbelievable. It's going to be. I think it's important for everyone to pay attention, and yeah, it's. I was not expecting this, even though the buildup has obviously been happening for a while, and everybody knows who Putin is. No surprise there, but this is a bridge further than I thought it would go, at least this early in the year or this early in 2022, 2023, because we knew tensions were building and we knew the things were in the offing. But yeah, man, it's unbelievable. It's hard to even know what to say or how to articulate it.
Yeah, I agree. It's just been clarifying. That's the best word that I can use, because we don't have any blood in the game. And I hate to put it that way, but we don't. So we have the knock-on effects, the magnitudal effects have an effect on us, but we're not going to see our men and women coming home in coffins. And it allows us to, I think, more clearly see the situation for better and for worse. And I don't know. I just peace, man. Like,
I hear that.
I don't understand why this is such a difficult concept, and it does require a salient look not only at our adversaries but at ourselves too.
Sure.
And
Sure.
I don't know. I don't want to get any further into it. I think that there's still a lot of things in play and all of that, but obviously we wish everyone the very best. And it's funny because, well, it's not funny. I reached out to GSC Game World a week ago. They're the studio in Kiev that makes Stalker, the series, the Stalker games.
Shit.
And I actually was in contact with them briefly to try to get them on the show before the invasion to talk about what was going on and what would happen to the game. Because they basically had said a month or so ago, the game's going to get canceled if this happens. This happened notably with 4A Games, which are the guys that make the Metro games.
Right.
Crimea was taken from Ukraine during the development of that game. And I talked to those guys at E3 and they moved the entire operation to Malta. So, so they're out, and they just have like a small satellite studio there now. So it touches the games. I'm trying to tell that story too. It touches the games industry. But speaking of history and all of this, reaching back into a complex past, but in a much more fun way, although arguably as murderous. Nathan Drake might kill as many people as a Russian battalion in the entire war.
The body count is thick.
The body count's high. The body count is high. But we're going to talk today about the 2007 PlayStation 3 exclusive smash hit, one of the most important games to ever come to the console, I would argue. Uncharted: Drake's Fortune. launched in late 2007 from Naughty Dog, the Sony-owned studio that is renowned today for their work in The Last of Us primarily, and Uncharted, of course, too. There have been 4 Uncharted games from Naughty Dog, as well as 1 from Bend. So there are 5 total, plus a spin-off that was kind of a standalone from Naughty Dog, Lost Legacy. So there's quite a bit of Uncharted, but we're going to stick here with the first one, and Dagan only has experience with this first one. So as we received many inquiries about this show, I'm really only going to stick to talking about this game so that we can move on to the next one and the next one or whatever.
Of course.
So a lot of people asking, what do you think about this and this guy's evolution and this? It's like, well, we're going to stay away from that.
I don't know yet.
Exactly. I want to have a conversation about this game itself. And this was by the way, a vote over on Patreon. So if you support us on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia, like many thousands of you do, and we really appreciate that. Thank you so much. One of the many perks you get, in addition to early exclusive access to every episode of the show, is the ability to submit ideas for the show, vote on other people's ideas. We have one fan voted topic come through every month, and they're actually stacking up because I have them written down here. Uncharted was one of them. Uncharted 2 is another one of them. Metal Gear Solid 4 is another one of them. Red Dead Redemption is another one of them. That's going to come next, I think. And
That's
then
coming next.
Star Wars Episode 3. We're still holding on to that one. I'm not ready.
Oh, I was just thinking
not
about
ready.
this.
I'm not ready yet. Invasion. I did have to say, when I saw when everything was happening a few days ago, I did have to tell Dagan that, to his face, I had to make sure he heard me, that I was saying that constantly. And Micah was just glaring at me. I'm like, the Russians have crossed the border into Donetsk. It can mean only one thing. Invasion. I love that guy in Star Wars. I don't know what the fuck that guy's name is. All right. Dig, Uncharted, Drake's Fortune, PlayStation 3, 2007. Usually I kick it over to you immediately, but I want to actually introduce this with a letter from Kabuto Kishi, who wrote into us on Patreon. We have many of your inquiries to get through for this episode, but he says, hey, Sick Parvis, Magna Colin, and Victor Dagan Sullivan. I don't have as much of a question as I do a brief story. I was an Xbox 360 kid through and through. My friends and I were balls deep in Call of Duty, Halo Reach, and Gears of War on that platform, and I couldn't imagine dropping the $600 or whatever that asinine cost was for a PS3. I crashed at a buddy's one time in high school as he had Uncharted on his PS3. He fell asleep, but before he did, he turned on the PS3 and handed me the controller to try it. I stayed up the entire night and played Uncharted through from beginning to end. I was stunned. I believe within a week I had sold my 360, bought a PS3, and the entire Uncharted collection. Uncharted 3 had just come out, so this was 2011 or 2012.
Yeah.
This game was completely responsible for getting me back into PlayStation. I have to identify this game as being, marking this game in PlayStation history. I think I know PlayStation history better than any other piece of game, like the Game Sphere. That's what I know the best. I think Nintendo would be in there a little bit from the old school and some other things, but when you look at the legacy of PlayStation from 1994/1995, even 1993 as it was founded, but 1994 when the console came out in Japan, 1995 in the West, and all the way through to today, there's just very specific releases that are very important to the consoles. And I would argue that Uncharted Drake's Fortune is maybe in the top 5 games that were ever released. Not in terms of quality, but in terms of when they were delivered and what they delivered. So I was thinking about how I was going to do this with Uncharted, because I was like, should I play it again? I'm like, I really don't want to play it again. And I was thinking about how many times I've beaten it. I've beaten the game at least 5 times. And I've platinumed the game. People go look at my trophies. I platinumed the game twice. I platinumed it on PS3 and then I did it again on PS4, which means in those 2 things, I beat them at least twice each, because you have to get crushing difficulty unlocked and all that. So that's how I did it. And I know these games intimately. So what I did instead was I watched a full playthrough of the game. And someone doing it very efficiently, and I was just kind of fast forwarding through the gameplay parts. I'm like, yeah, I remember this.
Okay.
And going
with
to the
voiceover or without? I'm always
no, without, just
without.
Straight,
okay,
no,
just
yeah,
watching
without.
the game. Okay,
and I just took copious notes. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this, remember that, and it brought back so many memories. And I think the thing that I want to start with the game is PlayStation was in a lot of trouble when this game came out, and I would argue that the brand was at its absolute lowest, in fact, when Uncharted came out, and that it was Uncharted Drake's Fortune that allowed it to start climbing out of the hole that it was in. It's weird to think about, but exclusives weren't as important as they used to be. In fact, if you think about the PS1, there are third-party exclusives that are really important on the console, but you don't think about PlayStation quality. That's not a thing yet. And when you think about PlayStation 2, a lot of second and third party games are coming out from Level 5 and all these different studios, but the first party still wasn't that important. And when you had games like Killzone coming out of Guerrilla, I'm wearing their shirt today, or you have a game like Jak and Daxter coming out of Naughty Dog, God of War, the original God of War with Jaffe coming out of Sony Santa Monica, these were important games, but because things were so busy, because the competition was so fierce with the Nintendo and Microsoft, PlayStation found itself in third place and actually getting the shit beat out of it. And it was very weird. It was a weird time. I remember very well. And there was nothing of real consequence. Resistance Fall of Man was good. MotorStorm was good. There were some second party games like Heavenly Sword that were good. But Uncharted Drake's Fortune, as I recall, and I'm sure a lot of people do, was the game that a lot of PlayStation fans looked at and said, like, this is the potential of the machine. And in watching that playthrough and just being reminded, I'm like, holy shit, this game is excellent. I mean, this is an excellent game. I think that through modern lens, people would look at it as a little short. I like that. It takes place over basically one day.
Very short. Yep.
And you can beat it, and I would say 10 or 12 hours is stretching it. I don't even know how you would spend 10 or 12 hours with the game. But,
Agreed.
But you could. And I like those bite-sized, it was not really bite-sized, but I like those smaller games, weekend games, as I like to call them. And I remember I was writing strategy guides at IGN when this game came out, and 2 games came out in 2007 that were seminally important, which were the original Assassin's Creed and the original Drake's Fortune. And in 2009, both of those games got their sequels. And we'll do Uncharted 2, as I said. And people started to realize that these ambitious third-person action shooter, whatever games were actually what was going to happen. Like it wasn't platformers, it wasn't obviously side scrollers and 2D games and even shooters, which were very important, but that there was going to be this movement, especially in PlayStation, that this was the move forward. And when you think about Uncharted Drake's Fortune, and then you think of The Last of Us and the rebooted God of War and Spider-Man and Days Gone and Horizon and Ghost of Tsushima and Infamous and all these games, they're all pretty much in this mold of high quality third person action.
Right.
And so I wanted to point that out, not only from what I remember about it, but being there and just knowing that Uncharted Drake's Fortune was the game that people gathered around TVs to watch at IGN. And that was the game that people wanted to play and wanted to understand. And the fact that they made it is amazing, because it wasn't obvious to let Naughty Dog do this. These days it seems suicidal for Naughty Dog to make a cartoonish game. But this was the first serious game they ever made. Yeah. Or at least since their Genesis days, and maybe there's some of their PC stuff. But as far as console releases are concerned, going from Crash Bandicoot to Jak and Daxter to Uncharted is not intuitive. And it worked. And I argue, and I've said it before, I think Naughty Dog is the best studio in the industry. And I think it starts with this game. So with all of that said, I wanted to bring this in from Jacob. He says, the release of the PS3 Slim in 2009 was my first real step into PlayStation, so I have a lot of nostalgic memories of this era. Kevin Butler, Finding Podcast Beyond, and of course, Drake's Fortune. Kevin Butler. Do you know who Kevin Butler is?
I don't.
So Kevin Butler was, you probably would remember it, but it was those famous commercials that were on for a few years of PlayStation, where it was like the guy that was the fake PlayStation executive, but it would always be like funny, like situations he would find himself in. And he got fired actually, and it was got sued, I think, by Sony because he did a touch or a Bridgestone commercial where he was playing a Nintendo Wii, which apparently was was against his contract, since he's looked at as that character. And you can go read about it. This was
that's amazing.
Maybe 10 years ago. So he says, Jacob goes on and says, I remember marveling at how Nate's jeans would get wet depending on how far into the water you waded. And I'll never forget seeing the submarine stranded on the cliffside for the first time. The very first trophies I ever earned are in this game, and I have been hooked ever since. So it was really cool going back and seeing the exact date I earned each one 13 years ago. That's the best part about trophies, by the way. Do either of you have any early PS3 memories connected to this game or general reminiscence of the early era? I'm curious, Dave, since you were not on the outside looking in quite at this point yet. You played Wii and you had PS2 and later PS3 and all of this, but I feel like Uncharted might have passed you by. And I'm wondering what your first impressions of this game were and when you became acquainted with it, because it's a big one and an important one. And I'm wondering, leading up to this, of course, and finally having played it all the way through, you must have become familiar with it earlier.
Yeah, this is one of those crazy episodes where it's so nice to go back in time. Now we're talking about almost 15 years. I'm channeling God, new dad, Dagan. We had our first daughter. We only had one child at that time. She was 7 or 8 months old in November of 2007. And yeah, I love all the associated pieces of history associated with this game, with Naughty Dog, and thinking about them now versus then, and their first sort of quote unquote realistic game outing coming out of Jack and Daxter, and all of the other cartoony stuff that they were known for. Now we think of The Last of Us and we think of them as like the game studio, the high quality storytelling, cinematic game studio. But when you think of Crash Bandicoot, it's like, wow, like this was a bold move. And I love all the history that you bring up. It's so interesting to hear, especially interesting for me to hear the history with PlayStation and Sony, and that reminder about what the playing field was like at that time, which is a pretty steep reminder, pretty stark reminder of how things were then, because the culture has changed so dynamically since then. And you know what? It's funny. I think on our PlayStation 3 episode, or talking about other PlayStation 3 games, I got my first PS3. To my best recollection, it was early 2009, but I wasn't playing anything. In fact, I remember, I think I told this story, I almost gave my PS2 to my neighbor at that time in our old house because I thought I was moving on, and then things just got busy being a dad and with working. I was commuting. I think in 2007, I might have still been commuting full-time to New York from southeastern Pennsylvania, so it was a crazy time. But the crazy thing about a topic like this is it's so nice to finally be acquainted with the first installment of this legendary franchise, because it's one of those game series. You always hear Uncharted, Uncharted, Uncharted. For years now, I've been hearing that, right? And those inevitable thoughts of, come on now, how good can these games possibly be? Well, I have to say, I'm here to tell you, I had never played any of them. I had never played the first one. So getting all the way through it very early on, minutes into it, I was hooked. And I had an absolute blast. And once again, I report back to you guys, hat in hand, with a humble, I get it now. Just like we just did recently with Halo and the first outing in that franchise. So glad I played this. So glad the door's open to keep going with the series, because I hear great things, and I'm relatively unspoiled. I heard one thing, unfortunately, in reading a spoiler for, I believe, the second game, but I'm relatively unspoiled for the rest. And I'll just start my side of the conversation with saying pure fun. That's what this game was for me. I found it very accessible. I got right into it very quickly. Minutes in, it was a little uncomfortable for the first couple of minutes. Then I got acclimated very quickly and had an absolute blast. Like you're saying, very digestible, very short. I think for the quality wedged in and the dynamic amount of stuff here, the variety, unbelievable. I couldn't believe how much they crammed into, like, some people beat this game in 8 hours. You're saying 12 hours max. I think I ended up spending 16 hours with the game just because I think it was exactly 16 hours all told. But for me, that's short. And I had an absolute ball. Absolute ball. I can't wait to break it down incrementally, but that's what I'll say from the outset. I had a blast.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. And I think a lot of the audience will be glad to hear that too. I want to start with the center of Uncharted, which is Nathan Drake. And Max Cannon wrote in and said, "Sic parvis magna moriartis. The cinematic commercial for Drake's Fortune caught my attention when I was 14 and became my obsession until I was gifted a PS3 and a copy of the game for my 15th birthday. I have incredibly fond memories of Uncharted and have to point out that Nolan North's performance as Drake is, in my opinion, the first truly great mocap performance in gaming. I'd even go as far as to boldly say that North's Drake is the most well-acted character in all of gaming when taking the whole series into consideration. While there were memorable performances in games prior to Drake's Fortune, I think Nathan Drake was the first character I'd ever played, as that was just as believable in gameplay as he was in cutscenes, especially when you consider where the industry was in 2007. Thrilled to hear you discuss this game, the game that started it all. Thank you, Max, for writing in." So I have to start with Drake because I think Nathan Drake is just so cool. Like, I love Nathan Drake. I've always loved Nathan Drake. He can't do anything wrong in my eyes. And I find him just dashing and interesting and smart. I love the scene in this game where Elena is kind of just marveling because he's just reading 16th century, like middle Spanish. And you think he's kind of just like a moron sometimes or whatever, but he's actually incredibly educated, incredibly smart. You learn much more about that later, about where he comes from and all of that, and we won't get into that here. But I love just the entire characterization of him. And I know that it's easy. And Amy Hennig, who I've interviewed extensively, and people can go read the many things I've done regarding her, and especially the history of Naughty Dog, in which I spoke to her extensively. She's a major inspiration for me as a writer. And not actually more, and I was telling Dagan, more organizationally than anything, because I saw how they organized Uncharted 4 specifically before it was announced. And I've kind of copied that organization for our role-playing game that we're working on, just because I really loved the way she did it.
It's awesome.
And so I'll tell you guys about that when the time comes. But for now, I have to just really focus on the lovability of this character, the wonderful writing and dialogue, the wit, the banter. And it's all, well, not all, but a lot of it is motion captured. And it's funny you brought up Halo, because we really liked Halo when we did Halo Combat Evolved about a month or so ago. This is 6 years later, and it's come a long way. Game storytelling has come a long way. If we said that there was one, I think, inherent and blatant weakness in Halo, it was just the lack of storytelling. It just wasn't very compelling from that point of view, which is a shame because it's so interesting.
Yeah.
And here they don't let anything go. There's a lot of good stuff. Like, it's very cinematic. There's a scene where I think Navarro is smoking a cigarette, or it's Raja, I think, is smoking a cigarette, and he throws it. And then there's a shot of the cigarette hitting Drake as he's hiding underneath the bridge. And you just think about these cinematic touches. It's like, this is not common in video games at this point. In fact, there were almost no games. I would say maybe Metal Gear and a few other games were the only ones that were this detail oriented. And I was struck, even though I was watching a PS4 playthrough of it. Did you play on PS3 or PS4?
I played it on PS4. Yeah.
PS4. Okay, cool.
Yep.
That's, by the way, I think the way everyone should play it. And the Nathan Drake collection is just a really easy way to play. But I watched the PS4 playthrough of it, so it has finer textures. I think the frame rate's going to be bumped a little bit, but it looks beautiful too. Like, it's funny, you look at it and you're like, this is, especially playing recently Horizon Forbidden West, which is maybe the most living game I've ever played. You look at this and you see, man, there's a lot of dead eyes and no facial but when you really just put yourself back into the historical relativism of 2007, it's like, damn, dude, I remember being so blown away by it. But I think it all starts with Nathan Drake. It all starts with Nolan North. I'm curious what you take away, especially you don't know him very well yet.
No.
So that's so exciting, because there's so much more for you to learn about the stories of Nathan Drake and where he comes from and how he met Sully and where he, who his parents were and all this stuff and how he became obsessed with this ring. And there's a lot, and you know him just a little bit.
Right.
And
I'm
curious what your takeaway is of Nathan Drake. What do you think about this character?
Well, I love hearing that, how much you love him, having experienced all the iterations of all the games, the entire franchise, that he's not only is he cool in this first outing, but he stays cool, and how much you care for him. That gives me a lot to look forward to. So I'm super happy to hear that. And you fall in love with this character relatively quickly. He's very fun. He's approachable. He's sort of this everyman, very likable. Of course, he's the protagonist that we're following along through this adventure. I think it's got, right away, this game smacked of two things for me. Indiana Jones,
of course,
through and through. And it reminded me a little bit of, I don't know why it was calling up Tomb Raider, because...
Oh, definitely.
Tomb Raider was one of my very first PlayStation experiences. In fact, I got the first PlayStation bundled with, I think, Battle Arena Toshinden.
Yeah, you did.
Right?
Nobody Beats the Wiz.
At Wiz, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I got Tomb Raider that same day, if not within a couple of days. So that was like my first game that I purchased outside of the pack-in. And just remembering how clunky it was. I was going through a very tough time with the advent of the N64 and video games sort of going from 2D to CG, and how polygonal everything was and blocky. And I had a very sort of hard adjustment with that. I was kind of clinging to the 2D fighters and the fluid animation, and I was very begrudgingly accepting this new generation of video games coming in. And not only did Tomb Raider look awful, but it just played so clunky, and I just had a very I never even got anywhere with that game because I just had such a bad experience with it. And just thinking of like how this could have been how they handled, look how far things evolved. Whereas like, I feel like it's like, this is what they meant with Tomb Raider. It's that amazing. But And Drake is the tip of the spear with that, right? And I love just the whole thing. And I mentioned earlier the key word being fun, right? So it's that whole treasure hunter thing, a little bit of a younger, slightly more lighthearted Indiana Jones. So you have that whole formula working for you. This energetic, high spirited, a little sarcastic, slightly irreverent, very likable. He's got that irrepressible can-do attitude and that swagger. And even though he's in this foreign alien land, very dangerous, being pursued by dangerous people, and uncovering this lethal plot, that air and tone of fun stays front and center, like the old adventure serials that this was modeled after. You have that sense of fun and lightheartedness, the constant joking, where this could take a completely different tone and almost be horrific. But I love the fact that they keep it fun and they keep it light, and Drake and the character of Nathan Drake, and I guess Nolan North's vocal performance at the center of that really keeps a fun tone and keeps you going through the game. The game moves at a very brisk pace, I felt like. Not too rushed, but it felt like a proper adventure. Chases, running, trying to uncover, get to certain milestones, rescuing, all these type of things. The platforming, the combat, everything was just a good time. It was just a really good time. It felt lighthearted. And then you have the substance underneath that. And like what you're saying with Naughty Dog, treating everything thoughtfully, the characters, the graphics, the gameplay, everything is just so. Everything is done to a T. And I think it makes for a really amazing experience. And also what you had mentioned a little bit too, Kyle, how well it's aged. You're talking about a game that's going on 15 years old. And yeah, you have the uncanny valley. You have the weird facial stuff. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is right before they started largely mocapping facial, although I know it was a lot of physical, dynamic mocap for the body. So a lot of that stuff was traditionally, realized and animated. So you do have the eyes, and it's a little strange, but it's amazing how well it holds up in the face of all of these newer things, like you mentioned. Really, really beautifully done. And that part of I'm playing an old game was such a small part of the experience, a much smaller part of the experience than I felt like it was going to be. With Halo, that was a big part of it. It was like, okay, this feels dated, even though obviously I had a blast with it. This felt a lot less dated than I thought it was going to be a decade and a half on, which is that was a great treat.
Yeah, it's a good sign. And hats off to Amy Hennig again, who I think brought a lot out of these characters. First of all, invented these characters, studied a lot of film, like you said, obviously drew a lot from Indiana Jones, obviously drew a lot from Tomb Raider as well. People used to call this Dude Raider back in the day, if you might recall.
I read that.
Yeah. So it's definitely, they out Tomb Raider. And then I think actually with the Tomb Raider reboots, the attempt out of Crystal Dynamics at that time, I believe, was to out Uncharted, which they kind of did and they kind of didn't. Those Tomb Raider games are pretty good. They're no Uncharted, but they're also a little different than Uncharted 2, so I won't give them up. And they make Lara into such a better character than she used to be, when she had her triangle boobs and all that kind of stuff, which was fine. It was fine.
I saw cosplay for that recently. It was brilliant.
Yeah, that's great. It's good stuff. And of course, Lara Croft is a great character too, but Nathan Drake, iconic. You brought up Indiana Jones. The Chosen One wrote into us and said, once you run across the crumbling platforms that was sold on this franchise, I reached safely and thought I'm playing an Indiana Jones game, and I've been hooked ever since. Did this sentiment resound with you at all? Yeah, of course. This was, I think, the major thing, because as I said, Drake is so cool, but who is the other cool character? Indiana Jones. I mean, at least for me as a growing up, and you had said this because archaeology, we're kind of turned on to archaeology club and all this you'd brought up in the past in elementary school through Indiana Jones. I think Indiana Jones was the first time I ever saw in my own mind an academic who was cool and stylish. I love the scene where the girl, I don't remember what movie it's in. It's in the first one, I think, where the girl closes her eyes and it's like,
yeah, that's the first one. Yeah. That's Raiders. Yeah.
And that's pretty cool. And so he's such a cool character with his whip and his pistol, and he's got a lot of bravado. But I like Drake in the same way. And for some reason, it just works. We know who he's imbibing, who he's going with, but it still works nonetheless. I remember when I was asking you about it over text, you had said that, and you had brought up earlier too, that you weren't quite first feeling the game, but you kind of quickly got into it. What
Yeah.
was your initial impression? Was it the gameplay, or was it the presentation that was a little startling to you?
Yeah, I think it was the gameplay. That first bit of the game where you're on the boat and you're waiting for Sully to to rescue you in the seaplane, and you're fighting off the pirates that are encircling the boat in their 4 little frigates or whatever. And yeah, I think it was just a matter of the slippery aiming and shooting, which again, I acclimated to very, very quickly. But and I think thinking back, because the whole of the game isn't like this, but that's a very claustrophobic, tight environment when you're on that ship. There's really nowhere to go. And most of the game isn't like that. Most of the game is much more open, where you could run for cover, you could be a little more stealthy, you have a little more room to operate. That's almost kind of a bad beginning for that game, because it's not really indicative of what's going to come next. But that's what it was. And I have no idea what's about to happen or what the game as a whole is going to be like. So I'm thinking, all right, this is a little weird. Is it going to be so controlled and so tight where I feel like I didn't have a lot of autonomy? But the game right after that, it's like, oh no, the scope, the magnitude, the scale, it's going to be much more sprawling and much more open, even though there's not a lot of exploration. Exploration is very light, especially exploration is probably nil if you're not looking for the 60 treasures, right? It's pretty linear. But that first thing, thinking back, it was a nice little experience because it's kind of a one-off. And this is a game, you have if you think of the jet ski, you think of the Jeep segments, you think of the quick time events, whatever. Everything's kind of a one-off. They squeeze a lot of experience into this game. They were trying to shoehorn in a lot, which I think 90% of the time works in its favor, in the game's favor. But yeah, that was the initial thing. It was like a little bit of flop sweat in the beginning, like, oh, I don't know how I'm going to like this. But 2 or 3 minutes in, I was completely sold and couldn't, one of those games like Halo, and I keep bringing up Halo because it was a recent one, but almost every game we've played on the show, where I would just look forward to spending time with it once the kids went to bed. It's like, I'm going to spend, from 9 to midnight, it's going to be me and Drake's Fortune. And I couldn't wait to get back to it. So fun.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that. The gameplay is a problem for some people. Derek Hoffman wrote in and said, hi guys, Uncharted is where the modern Naughty Dog started, and I think it's a great game. However, I think it's the weakest, mostly from a gameplay level. I don't find it very fluid, and it definitely doesn't measure up to the storytelling and visuals. Is this where the phrase Naughty Dog struggles with gameplay started, and do you agree? KnockBack rules, thanks guys. So Naughty Dog often gets pinched for gameplay, and I think that my personal take on the Uncharted games all the way through was that people were getting a little too crazy about how the game controlled. And I remember thinking that at the time. People were really beating up Drake's Fortune. Uncharted 3 actually was a game people beat up from that perspective too.
Oh, interesting.
They switched something that really bothered people.
Oh.
And then I think Uncharted 4 really started getting more into the conventions of like auto aim and all that, which is fine. But I think people have to remember that, and this is my estimation, and people might not agree, but the third person shooter in 2007, that nut wasn't really cracked until the previous year. I think you can go back. Yeah, because I think you can go, first of all, there are many third person cover based shooters, but I think you can go back to Kill Switch, which was a really important one. And then of course, Gears of War, when it comes out in 2006 on Xbox 360, was, I would argue, other than Kill Switch, the first game that truly felt great. I love Gears of War. I think that game's awesome. And it's very bullet heavy. It's first of all, it's heavy to play. Everyone's spongy. Uncharted doesn't feel that way. Uncharted is much more arcadey. It's why you have to kind of suspend your disbelief when you play Uncharted, because it doesn't really make any sense when you think about it.
Oh god,
it's like Nathan Drake is just, first of all, there's like history everywhere that's not been touched for hundreds of years. Nathan Drake is just murdering everyone. I mean, his body count is insane by the end of the game, nonetheless, the end of all of his games. So you have to kind of suspend your disbelief from that perspective. But I encourage people to kind of look at it through a different lens, which is, it wasn't trying to be a tight third person shooter. It didn't purport to really be that way. And I think it could control better. They improve it on the PS4 version for sure. But
yeah,
I think it's totally fine. And maybe when you're let me back up. When a game is being played, gameplay is important. Having fun and having a functional game is, of course, central to playing games. But I also think that when everything around a game is so good and you're beating it up kind of half-heartedly because that's the only thing that stands out is maybe not up to snuff, I think that's a pretty good thing for 2007. 2007 was a really big year in video games. It was one of the biggest years ever. This is the year Super Mario Galaxy came out. This is the year BioShock came out. This is the year the Orange Box came out, Portal. A lot of big games came out in 2007.
That's a
Big
big
games.
year. Yeah.
And Uncharted standing out, Assassin's Creed, like I said, and Uncharted standing out even amongst all of those. Crysis, the original Crysis. I mean, it's a big year. So I wanted to throw that out there. Dig, I wanted to ask you about Victor Sullivan.
Sure.
Josh Games wrote in and said, "What's up, Moriarty Bros? What did you all think of the reveal that Sully wasn't actually killed early on in the game?" So if you see anything from the other games, you know that Sully's not dead. But I'm wondering how you felt about Sully and how you felt about him seemingly dying. I can't go back to that moment because I don't remember. You just know that he doesn't. So it doesn't have that same resonance. But I love that character. I love the father-son aspect of their relationship, which I think comes out more and more as time goes on. And I don't think that I appreciated with Roland and Navarro that they are like the shadow version of Drake and Sully. I don't think I actually ever really noticed that until I watched the game. And I'm like, oh, it's like a mirror image. Because you hear the specific thing with Roland, or I'm sorry, with Roman. It's Gabriel Roman, not Roland.
Right.
With Gabriel, that he says something like to Navarro, you left your brain in the slum I found you in. And
oh shit, I don't think I even recognized
and
that.
so they have like this almost friendship where the old man is the kind of the money and the substance, and the young guy's kind of bringing him on this chase. It's exactly what Drake is doing to Sully. But they have this good friendship. You're not supposed to know how they meet yet. I won't spoil it for you. So we'll just talk about them as we know them from this game. What do you think of Sully?
Yeah, super cool. I love the formula. That's a really good catch about Roman and Navarro too, because I thought the villains were relatively unexplored. Like we didn't get too much origin with that, I felt like, but that's a good catch, that one bit. They're kind of shadow versions of the protagonists. But Sully was a lot of fun. You know, I love the fact of, again, like just at front and center in this game, the idea of fun. Like there's something with Nathan, there's something so cool about a character who's in such intense danger, not recognizing that. Like there's something so cool about a character not recognizing the danger that they're in and just being so intrepid and lighthearted about everything, because you're kind of putting yourself in that position. Be like, I'd be shitting a brick, you know, but that's like watching an indie film. Like they're facing these insane perils and not only succeeding, but they're relatively cool about it. And I think Sully is another character who helps tease that out of this game, where it's like you have this long-time treasure hunting partner, this mentor or father figure type for Nathan. And I love, you know, there's a lot of sort of fun cliche in there, the eternally cigar chomping, wisecracking, father-son relationship. But it reminded me again of Indiana Jones, right? The Last Crusade, where Indy and his dad had this very contentious relationship, where this relationship's a little more easygoing. They get along better. They're a little, if it gets argumentative, it's more in a playful fashion. And I love the fact that you have the older character as sort of the con man. You know, Sully's sort of the confidence dude. He's sort of the one. You get a lot of Nathan's personality. You could see how Sully passed down a lot of those traits as far as his character, as far as his personality, his tactics, all of that kind of thing. You could see a lot of Nathan already, even though I'm just starting to get to know these characters, which I thought was really fun. And I love that brief flirtation with, first of all, whether Sully is a traitor or a turncoat. And then him getting killed seemed like an interesting twist. And then, of course, the bullets deflected by Francis's diary that's in his pocket and the whole thing, which is like the old World War II legend of the Zippo lighter that blocks the bullet. Right. Like it was kind of a reflection of that. Super, super fun. And you know, another thing that sort of another fun part of the formula for stuff like this, I think, that comes out of the old adventure serials and Indy and Johnny Quest and other lovable treasure hunter types, Lupin the Third and everything, is luck. And I think Nathan and Sully share this sort of, they're guided, this sort of romance, or they're sort of guided by Lady Luck. You know, they have a definite, luck is part of their formula for success, or why they survive this kind of shit. And that's just fun. You know, that's just a fun thing to put into the game. And I enjoyed that. And I enjoyed the relationship. And again, like the voice acting, this is Richard McGonigal, right?
Right.
That does the voice of Sully. Really distinctive voice. Interestingly, fits perfectly for the way Victor looks, although the voice actor looks nothing like the actual Victor Sullivan. Voice fits perfectly. And again, that charisma, that charm, it just makes it, you want to follow them along in this adventure. It's kind of a pleasure. And the same thing with Elena. You know, it's a pretty good trio of likable characters.
Yeah, he's great. And I love, you know what I love? This is a decision that they make, I think, in the writing of the game that could have created a lot of tension, but they chose not to, and I'm really happy they didn't, which is that they never make Drake doubt Sully. When Elena says to him, "Are you sure about this guy?" He's like, he kind of brushes her off, which I like.
Yeah.
It signals a deeper connection. And when they find him later on in the library and they confront him, and Nathan does say, like, it's kind of weird, isn't it? And then he explains everything to him and realize that their friendship really, like, Elena's kind of the objective observer that would make the obvious assumption, and yet the writing doesn't bring you down that road. Did you think that Sully was dead, or did you know well enough about the series to know that he was alive?
No, I had no idea. I mean, it gets a little weird because it seems like Nathan gets over it quickly, but
right,
I think
that's
weird. Just built into the event. You know, it's such a short, the breadth of the whole adventure is so short that it's like, what are you going to do? You're going to make him grieve for 3 hours? You know, you really couldn't do it. It's kind of like one of those impossible things to pull off in a video game, or very difficult thing to do. But no, I didn't know what to think. But you make a great point about Sully, rather Nathan standing by Sully and saying he's capable of a lot of things, but he's not capable of being a traitor. He's sure of that. He has complete conviction in his friend, and that, again, that's that. It could get dark there, right? Maybe the new members kind of talking Nathan into something that, you know, it's like, oh man, did my friend betray me type of thing, and that could take on a whole nother tone. But it just keeps that fun adventure serial tone where it's like, no way, not my friend type of thing. And it's true. And in fact, he was working to throw off the enemy, which makes it even cooler. It was like Sully was like really trying to mislead them.
Right. Accidentally leads them to the treasure, but accidentally leads them to it. But his intention was not to. So I had to ask you, what I like about this game too is there are very few characters. They introduce some core characters in other games that you get to know that actually are in more than one game. But for now, we only have these 3 protagonists, and the third is Elena, played by Emily Rose. Now, I've met Emily Rose a few times. I've met all of these people, of course.
Oh,
but
that's awesome.
When I say this only because Emily Rose was in Jericho. And I had to tell her, I was like, when I met her, I'm like, she was like doing a press tour or whatever. I'm like, this isn't relevant. I fucking love Jericho.
What did she say to that?
She's like, oh, it's so cool. Thank you. She played Trish, for people that don't.
I knew she looked familiar. I knew she was in, because I watched the making of Drake's Fortune, and I was like, I know.
And that's from the same era. Like she had filmed Jericho and Uncharted around the same time.
Jericho was the best.
Oh, definitely. It was awesome.
It's the best.
And so, yeah, she was in, I think, the second season, if I remember correctly. And then she was the main character in that show Haven, which I never watched, but that's where you might know her as well. But I think she's like kind of soft retired now. I think she has like kids and she's out. But I really like her too. And again, another writing choice that they make that I think is very interesting is after Drake thinks that Sully is dead, he kind of wants to leave. She's the one that wants him to stay to keep fighting. And I like that a lot. I think that it's an interesting sort of approach where she has her own angle. She's the journalist. In fact, one of my favorite shots in the entire game is when, and I remember this when I was watching, I was like, oh yeah, I remember really loving that, was when she finally lets go of the camera and she says like, damn, or something like that. And she's dropping it for her. And I loved that. And how she just wanted the story and how she was incredibly brave and she's charming. And of course there's this romance bubbling with her and Drake and all of this, but I'm really taken by her character. I love the performance. I've always really loved Elena. I think she's a great character. I think sometimes AI companions can get distracting and annoying, but
Yes.
it's not The Last of Us. And I don't mean this as an insult to The Last of Us, because it's obviously one of my favorite games ever. But Ellie being seen by the enemies but not alerting the enemies is a design choice, because the game would be unplayable otherwise and would frustrate the shit out of people because they have no
Mm-hmm.
control over this other character. And playing something a little more pulpy like this, it doesn't really matter that Elena is just running around firing her gun, that Sully's firing his Magnum pistol, and all of these kinds of things around. So she's never a bother. It's she's much like Sully. She's there for banter as well, and the banter never stops. I love it, just how it never stops, never ever stops. I think Drake says at one point, like, "There's blood everywhere in soup," and it's like, what the hell are you talking about? Just a lot of weird stuff in there. So, what do you think about Elena Fisher, the journalist?
I really came to love this character quickly. It was almost like the ramping up of getting acclimated with the gameplay. It was like, all right, this character has a very specific journey. Thinking back, it was like, all right, how am I going to feel about this character? She kind of starts out, well, she becomes a proper partner for Nathan, which I love. A proper proxy, just as important to him in this quest, I would say. But you first get to know her. You think, all right, this is just first serving as this escorted character, right? Then it seems like she has kind of a mind of her own. She has her own mission. Nathan wants to get the artifact. She wants to get the shot. So they're kind of vying for their passions. But there's a similarity between the two, because he wants the treasure. She wants to make it the documentary. They're both willing to sacrifice life and limb for their goals, which is kind of cool. And then just becomes a full-fledged, integral, necessary part of the journey, which I love. They gave her that growth, and she has a very similar courage and cleverness and wit to Nathan. And that those things, those sort of qualities prove vital to Drake. Her heroic efforts save his skin on more than one occasion. And it makes sense for the character, right? You think of this tough reporter slash journalist slash documentary filmmaker. She's got to have that thick outer layer of courage, that's necessary just to do her job. Think of like an embedded Vice reporter or something, right? Like she has to have that sort of intrepid quality, almost like a treasure hunter type character would have, in order to go on a caper like this. And just the spirit of the character. I love that one scene. I think it's right in the beginning, right, where he gives her the gun. And she's like, "Have you ever used one of these?" And she's like, "Yeah, just point and shoot." And she's a little nervous, she's a little trepidatious, but she's in. You know what I mean? She's totally game, and she's got that wide-eyed, very believable, I almost want to say Western girl quality, typical Western girl her age quality,
Definitely.
but at the same time, extremely intelligent, crafty, and capable. Like I said, a proper partner, and feels almost like a female version, almost of Nate, with the wits and the intelligence, the lightheartedness, the wisecracking. It's like she seems like the perfect addition to this already amazing duo with Nathan and Sully.
Yeah, she melds, in my opinion, and I think Emily Rose does a really great job making this happen, of melding some sort of wide-eyedness with worldliness. She's not stupid. She's not scared. She's
Absolutely
brave and bold and daring. And I always, this might come from having a female writer writing the game, but I always thought that it was no irony that Elena was a great character, considering you need a strong female kind of.
Absolutely.
And you get more later with Chloe and others, but this core is essential. I mean, this is Uncharted to me. These three will always be Uncharted. And I remember Greg Miller and I on Podcast Beyond used to argue, because I used to say, and I don't want to spoil the other games, I'm not going to, but it's obvious that nothing happens to Sully because he's in the trailers for all of them. And I remember I kept saying every time an Uncharted game would come out, I was like, wouldn't it be interesting if they killed Sully? And he would just hate that idea. And it's true in hindsight. I don't know why I would want to shake it up like that. You almost can't imagine one without the other. So let me ask you about the performances generally.
Yeah.
Tyler Mitchell wrote in and said, "Hi guys, I love the series and I love what it's done for PlayStation. It really was the beginning of the current PlayStation identity. That said, the thing I've always felt was so revolutionary about the game was the way Naughty Dog got the actors together in a room and had them actually act together. We got the best performances we'd ever seen from a game at that point, and it's rarely topped outside of Naughty Dog. Other than Rockstar, it hasn't. Why do you think this is so uncommon even today? It's funny you bring up Rockstar because I want to reinstill in people, this is a cheap game to make by current standards. But in 2007, this was a very expensive game to make. And it's the only it's money that really only a first party would even bother spending because they get 100% of the money back in the game, not 70%, like a lot of others would get. If Ubisoft puts all this energy in, they still have to sell it on someone else's console and split the money, right?
Good point. Yep. Sure.
So first parties have the great advantage. Like Nintendo's first party is very well known for quality. Their games are just simply not broken. They patch them now, which is unbelievable. I remember when I first saw my Switch downloading a patch, I was like, what? But on PS3, we've been getting patches since 2006. And I look at it and I'm like, so Nintendo first party, they have the luxury, right, to spend and say, like, our games are going to function. They're really going to work.
Of course.
And they do. And because they understand a lot of people are never going to plug their Switch into the internet ever. And they're never going to. So, and I think Microsoft did a really, and does still do a really nice job with interconnectivity and party gaming and co-op gaming, multiplayer gaming, and all that. Party chat, I should say, and whatever else.
Right.
And I think Sony decided to spend their money on games. And I think that's really wise. And it worked out really, really well. The reason you don't see games like this at the time, and maybe few games like it since, is because games get more and more expensive. As Sean Layden said before he left PlayStation, games are just getting way more expensive to make. And we have to kind of make a decision. With Horizon Forbidden West as the most recent game for when we're recording this, this is a huge game. It took them 5 years, probably $150 million or more to make.
Jeez.
Do you look at that and say, like, would this be better spent 3 years on a game that's 10 or 12 hours long? Well, that was the Uncharted games. And I do think what differentiates them is the performances, but it's only something that can really happen when you're willing to invest in it. It's kind of old hat to do it the way they do it now, but the reality is that Sony's always going to spend a little more, and they're always going to have a little bit more of a reason to do it, because if your first party can't shine, then nothing else can shine. I'm just curious if the collective performances of everyone, not only our three protagonists, but of Roman and Navarro as well, and Eddie Raja, you can tell like it is a step above.
Yes.
And again, it's a little further away, but thinking back about Halo, we keep using that as a touchstone because it's just so recent for us. It's night and day. It's just totally night and day. And you can see that from that perspective. So from an overall perspective, I mean, had you ever seen, if you think about the chronology of the games you've played, this must be the first game that really struck you in this way, right? In
Absolutely.
that chronology?
Yeah. If you think about it from 2007 perspective, Kyle, absolutely. And I know just from watching the making of Doc that they were Naughty Dog was after quote unquote proper actors, stage and screen actors, to bring that gravitas, to bring that level of performance that they wanted to match with the quality of the rest of the game. It's kind of amazing thinking back only 15 years that wasn't really a huge thing yet, or that wasn't a common thing yet. But if you're gonna put quality into the effort from soup to nuts, then the voice acting is in a game like this, where there's going to be dialogue, where the characters are going to be very important. There's going to be cutscenes. There's going to be a storyline involving these players, even though there's only a handful of protagonists and antagonists. You got to have that quality. And, I guess really pound for pound, it is really, really strong. The way they, not only the voice performances, but the way they had them in the room together, the way they did it, the old fashioned way or traditionally, where, the characters, the players got to know their characters. They got to know their personalities. They got to actually interact in the same room. They weren't in some sound booth with a pair of headphones on, reading off the script and trying to imagine how the other character was inflecting and all that kind of stuff in a dialogue scene. And it reads, it's really, really strong. In fact, you end up you take it for granted now. But then when you think back, to a decade and a half ago, it's like, no, this wasn't really a common thing yet. And I guess, you think of a guy like Nolan North, he still does the podcast with his pal Troy Baker, right?
Yeah, I
think of those two dudes.
I don't know if they do that anymore. I feel like there might be something between them now. I don't know.
Is there?
I don't know. I just
think of them as far as performance. iconic names, some of the first, important names in video game voice acting, but also just the level of charisma. Not only the skill, but the level of charisma that both of these guys have. They're just great at what they do. And to see that extend to these other ones that I wasn't really familiar with, and Emily Rose and Richard McGonigal, and the people that played the three main antagonists, just good shit, man. There's not even there's no weakness in the entire thing. It's really, really nice. And not only that, but you could see who the characters are echoing. You can see the inspirations in each one of these characters. There's a lot of texture there, and the send ups. It's just a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm reading about this now. It seems like they did that retro replay thing together, and then they had apparently some public statement where they had some sort of feud and kind of stopped doing the show so they wouldn't ruin their friendship more, I guess, or whatever.
That's a shame.
Yeah, I know Troy. I haven't talked to him in a long time. I actually DM him once every couple of years or whatever, just to congratulate him on a role or whatever, and he never responds to me. But he was always very nice to me, and Nolan North was always really nice to me too. But Nolan North is the heart and soul of Uncharted, and obviously Troy is the heart and soul of The Last of Us. So with Ashley, of course. So maybe there's a little bit of rivalry there. I don't presume to know.
That's interesting because they're both so good. It's one of those friendships that you love to see.
Definitely, I agree. Let's talk about some moments here. I was curious specifically about what you thought of the U-boat reveal, which is a famous part of this game. The plane crash, which is another really famous part of the game. I love when Elena jumps out of the plane and then he's just flying it and he's like, what am I doing? Because he's just still flying the plane even though it's crashing, which is a great stuff. But there are a lot of great moments. What I was reminded of, though, in watching this, and maybe it's a little bit of a knock against the game, is including the U-boats and therefore including the Nazis is a little too on the nose with Indiana Jones. Like, why do they have to be brought in? Because that was what was so unique about it, was because, as I've said in the past, I think when we talked about Indiana Jones, and you know this, and I think a lot of people know this, the Nazis really were obsessed with the arcane and the supernatural. They had an entire division of the SS dedicated to it. Wolfenstein is not real, but it was kind of rooted in that.
Yes.
In that, especially with Himmler, who was incredibly obsessed. They were obsessed with finding old ruins and relics and evidence of their greatness and all this, and they went all over the world to do it. That's where Indiana Jones comes from.
Yes.
And that's cool because that is Indiana Jones's pocket in the first, not so much the second game, but the second movie, but in the first and third movies, certainly. And in the fourth one, it's like kind of more in the Cold War. So you have more of the Russian enemies, although we hate that movie. But seeing that, I was like, yes, this is an awesome moment, but God, can't we just get away from World War II? There was really no purpose to this, because they could have interpreted it through the story as, and we see it later on when we find Drake's bearded skeleton, which is the fucking funniest thing ever. When it's like a skeleton with this perfect beard on it. And I was like, Jesus Christ, it's so weird. But they could have just left it there, where the Spanish, and we'll talk about the supernatural elements, but the Spanish get cursed, the British find them and kind of hit a dead end. And that's the end. I don't really understand why the Nazis are even involved in this in some cursory way. So I want to knock it for that reason, because I feel like it's too Indiana Jones in that way. Like, just, you don't need to be that Indiana Jones. You're threading the needle perfectly. You don't need Nazis. We don't need U-boats. UK 2642, which is So what do you think of some of these moments? What moments stand out to you? And do you share my consternation that maybe they go a little too far with the Indiana Jones stuff in this because of the Nazis?
Yeah. What you're saying completely speaks to me. I mean, if you let's think about not including the Nazi elements of this game, which become a relatively big thing, starting with the discovery of that U-boat wedged into the waterfalls, which, by the way, I think is an amazing, gorgeous set piece. I love seeing that U-boat sort of wedged in there into the cliffs with the waterfalls around it. It's really neat. So from a visual perspective, it gives it a lot of dimension. But let's take out the Nazi elements for a second. This game it takes bits and pieces, makes loving reference to things like Indiana Jones, but it stays far enough away. Nathan, I don't know how old he's supposed to be exactly in this game, but he's younger than Indy. I hate to say it this way, I mean it in a positive way, but Nathan Drake is sort of like indie meets like Nick Lachey or something. Like he's like
Yeah,
boy
yeah,
band handsome, right?
sure.
He feels much more contemporary with the jeans and his t-shirt and his neck, his kind of necklace with the ring around. You know what I mean? It just feels much more contemporary, but it's taking a page out of indie, but it's its own thing. Now you're entering this Nazi dimension into the story, and it's like, all right, yeah, this is mirroring Indiana Jones. Maybe a little too much, but I'll tell you why I love it. I'll tell you why I really like it. It adds a lot to, first of all, again, the visual dimensions, finding the U-boat, that whole adventure, and then later the Nazi underground dungeon-esque labs that they encounter, where the game is able to, well, not only for the plot, which we'll get to, but the game sort of enters another Resident Evil like dimension as a result of that, and I loved that. I love the surprise. I love the fact that I didn't see it coming at all, and I love the fact that it just makes the game. It's not redundant. It's not repetitive. There's always something different happening, and the game really turns on a dime because of the whole Nazi involvement, and that's why I really do dig it. And it like you said, it does kind of play into the fact that the Nazis were known for that. They were exploring the occult, all the, history, ancient, I guess, whatever would be considered the ancient powers or whatever.
Like
So
literally like the Templars and Knights of the Round Table, like kind of shit. Like they were really into that stuff. Not
it's
all of them,
crazy.
but they were tuned into it. It's true.
Yeah, it's like they almost left no stone unturned in trying to leverage power or whatever magic they could invoke or whatever. So yeah, so I did like that. It just feels colorful and fun rather than just the pirates, just the rainforest, just the pursuing or the rival treasure hunter in the Roman character. You added another dimension to it, which I think feels like a comic book. It feels like a proper something, you were able to open the door to monsters because of it and stuff like that, which I think was kind of cool. I think it was kind of fun.
I want to talk to you about that in a second. But
All
since
right.
you had brought up, and we had brought up several times now the villains, we should talk about them. Roby, Karobi, Zapanta wrote in and said, "Good day, treasure hunters." How do you feel about the character of Eddie Raja? I was a little sad when they killed the character. I thought he would have been a really good anti-hero kind that would work with against or double cross Drake in future games. Did you find him as interesting and fun as I did? He's definitely the most memorable, although least important character.
Yeah.
You have
Agreed.
Navarro and Roman as kind of partners. Roman, of course, the traditional European rich mogul of some sort that's pulling strings. He has his third world. I mean, that's why I was so surprised by the what he was saying. It sounded almost racist because he was saying like, "I found you in a slum," and
That's interesting. I got to go back and watch that
and
part.
so there's Navarro, and then of course they have this. They don't really get into it, but what I assume is that they hired the muscle, Raja's muscle, like he's a gangster or something that I guess is like the leader, the lieutenant of these people. So you have these three characters. What did you make of them, and who stood out to you the most out of the three of them?
Well, Roman, automatically, you have this older gentleman, the rival treasure hunter. He seemed like the Belloc surrogate to me, right?
Right.
Raiders,
Definitely.
Indy has his, Indiana Jones has his rival archaeologist. Nathan Drake's got to have his rival treasure hunter, right? That's what it smacked of to me. And I like that formula of the enemies going after the same treasure, which by turn makes it a race, right? So besides being contested by the native challenges and dangers in this place, Nathan and Elena and Sully, you also have somebody trying to get to the goal first. And, by the way, we'll take you out if it means that they're going to succeed and you're going to fail. So that makes for a proper dangerous character. But again, with Roman, I wanted to see a little more origins, a little more texture. He's a relatively unexplored character, but I think he was in there again to create that sense of urgency where it's like there's a race for this treasure of El Dorado. And God, Nathan, you got to get there first because this guy means business. I love what they did with the Navarro character because that twist at the end, I had, again, just for having proper twists in a video game that were not cliched or hackneyed in any way. Like it felt like a proper surprise when things happen in this game, and for as fun as everything was. And I just kind of thought that the Navarro character was Roman's lieutenant, like a mini boss. I was thinking of him as, right? Every time Roman popped up, Navarro would be there with his AK or whatever. But the way it plays out was, again, just this unexpected twist where, of course, spoilers, Roman gets turned into one of these zombie Resident Evil type undead creatures, and he's cursed, and then Navarro plugs him in the head. So Navarro becomes the heavy for the very final part of the game. And the Eddie Raja character, yeah, I think you're right. I guess he's the domestic, he's the guy, he's the local guy, leader of the pirates, obvious longtime enemy and rival of Nathan's. These two have some history. You could see that in their exchanges. And I wrote this with a question mark. And I think it's interesting in retrospect. When I play it again, I'll pay more attention to this. But it seems almost obvious to me thinking back that these two are trying not to kill each other. Like there's some sort of, not just when they're first squaring off against those undead guys crawling out of the, in that underground passage, crawling out of the wells or whatever, but where they have to cooperate. But there's something there that seems like they're trying, there's some sort of affection there, even though obviously they're on they have their goals and they're rivals as a result of that. And I read some accounts of fans sort of clamoring to bring back this character, because I think with the exception of Roman, Navarro's death, and I guess Eddie Raja's death, even though you would think they would die, you could leave it open-ended that they could come back. So that was interesting to me that people fell that in love with this character. And I think that's because he has that sort of verbal repartee and everything with Nathan. He's almost like you want to see these two work together, even if it's begrudgingly. It would be kind of fun,
Definitely.
see more of that.
Definitely. Yeah, we never get to see, Raja obviously dies, but we never get to see him in prequel format either, which is interesting because they do speak to each other like they know each other. Like you say, they have history and all this. Navarro turning on Roman, I think, is an encapsulation of that mirror image I was saying, in which you see Drake and Sullivan in this trusted relationship that sees itself through the drama. You see the mirror image of them in Roman and Navarro turns on Roman. So it's the unexpected thing, and there's a little bit of a path that they take there.
It's an awesome point. Good point.
Well, thank you. So let me ask you about a few other things. We had brought up the supernaturalism in the game. Devin K, this is very controversial in the game. Devin K wrote in and said, "Hey, Colin D, I could not believe it when Uncharted Drake's Fortune brought the cursed descendants in towards the end of the game. Naughty Dog somehow added horror-like elements into this action-packed game, and it was a great surprise for me. What were your impressions when the supernatural elements of Uncharted Drake's Fortune came to light? Thanks." Some people really don't like this.
I know.
And I don't know that I really have a problem with it. I just wish it wasn't that. I don't mind it. I think it's a very satisfying ending. It kind of makes sense. Again, we have the suspension of disbelief with Uncharted, but it's not, you're only kind of half suspending your disbelief. So you would expect that these ancient relics, it's not unlike Indiana Jones. There is supernatural shit in Indiana Jones too. It's just not quite on the nose like this. I mean, the dude, in Temple of Doom, the dude's ripping people's hearts out of their chest. So it's really not, and I love that stuff. I mean, I love that scene when he's on the ladder and he's like just praying and whatever. And I love that character.
Also controversial though. A lot of people don't like it.
Right, exactly. Temple of Doom is, when we talked about it, a lot of people think that movie's racist and all the rest. We'll talk about it again because we have to do better Indiana Jones episodes.
Yeah, we have to do them one by one. Yeah.
But we didn't know what we were doing early on in the run. But Devin is curious about what you think of the supernaturalism. I took a positive question here, but we definitely got negative inquiries about this as well. Again, I would have preferred that they figured out a way to not do that, but I don't hate it. It's a pulp action movie, basically. So what do you make of it? It seems like you do like it.
I do. And I think looking at it in a pulpy, comic booky way is a positive way to look at it. I think, just for pound for what the game gives you, I think it gives you more. It's like, all right, now it took a proper turn. Yes, it felt a little like, oh, this game just became a Resident Evil game, which is really weird. But I think it was successful in one. I know I'm easily rattled, but it scared me. I was like, what those things are actually creepy. You're fighting in this dark lab with flickering lights and just the sounds of like dripping pipes. It added a whole nother atmosphere to the game. This game did, for environments, an atmosphere. This game was very similar to Halo CE for me because it did this very cool thing of moving in and out of these vast outdoor organic expanses and then having you in more claustrophobic inside indoor confines and then going back out to the outdoors again. And this was it shifted on a dime again where it's like, okay, now you're in these, you're in the rainforest, or you're in these ancient temples or ruins that are hundreds and hundreds of years old. Now you're in these labs that are of like the 30s or 40s. You're in this whole nother environment. So it just added a little more dimension, added a little more variety, which was really fun. But one thing I also realized, you realize maybe a third into this game, no matter where you go, right? You're in the depths, you're in the bowels of the earth, you're in these underground temples. There's always pirates down there. You're always running afoul of pirates. These guys are like everywhere. It gets cartoony. It's like, how are the pirates down here? You know, I fell into a place where people haven't been in hundreds of years or whatever. I don't think they could have kept doing that with the places that you go. So they almost had to introduce another enemy. Like Halo had the Covenant, and then they had to introduce the Flood, right? This was another thing, was like, let's add another enemy to make it make a little more sense within the story confines of the game. It's a little more believable that there's these monsters under there rather than pirates waiting for you down there. You know, so it just, maybe that was part of the thinking with that, where it was like, all right, maybe we could just add another enemy. But yeah, I felt like it was a lot of fun. And if you're thinking about it, it's interesting, right? It's almost like, because it's a video game, you could give it a pass. But if this type of thing played out in an Indiana Jones film, it would be a lot harder to pull off, right? In a live action film, it would just come off as hokey, even something that's campy by its nature, right? But in the video game, I felt like, I went in for it completely.
Right on. I want to ask you about 3 different silos that I think are important to this game, just to kind of get your take on them. The first I want to ask you about is pacing. How do you think the game does with pacing between combat and story and exploration and puzzle solving and all of that? I'm not much of a puzzle guy in games. I fucking hate puzzles in games. But they're not too complicated here. So how do you feel that because the game kind of starts frenetically, but that's really more of a tutorial on the boat. But a lot of it is climbing and all of this and just kind of exploring. I'm curious how you felt the game was paced, if you ever felt like you were bored.
Never. I always felt engaged. I feel like this game was one of those games that does just enough. It's not too complex. It's accessible. I mean, I'm examining it right from a gamer who's relatively green, especially for third-person action or third-person shooters or whatever. The cost for entry, again, was really low. Just minutes where I felt acclimated. I felt relatively comfortable. The learning curve wasn't steep, and I got better and better as I went along. I think by the end of the game, I really had command of it. You know what I mean? Where it felt like a properly satisfying experience. And, you know, it is a 3-pronged formula for this game. It has a nice rhythmic back and forth between the 3 gameplay modes. As you said, the combat, the platforming, and then the puzzle solving. But I think the intent of the game, especially in being so short and squeezing so much in, is that it is intended to play at a relatively brisk pace. You're a treasure hunter. You're racing for this treasure. There's a lot of dangers at play. You're racing against rival treasure hunters. So that energetic sense of urgency is important. And I felt like they did a nice job of saying, okay, this is going to be a combat segment. Then you're going to do some platforming. The puzzle solving is very light. It doesn't really stop or interrupt the momentum. You know, it's light to very light exploration. Even if you wanted to hunt for the 60 treasures, it doesn't really take you off course too far. And then repeat from square one. And then 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, over and over again. And I think each thing within that formula, each of the 3-pronged attack, was really fun. I thought the combat was fun. I thought the cover system was really satisfying, where you could just kind of take cover behind terrain, you know, hide behind the wall, hide in the doorway, and then pop out, attack, pop back into cover, reload. You have a couple of different guns at one time. You have to mind your ammunition. There was enough variety of the weapons, although not an overwhelming amount. Just enough to manage if you have that OCD like I have, where you pop behind cover, make sure you're fully loaded. After all the enemies in an area cleared, make sure you take the time to reload, restock on the weapons, maybe switch out something for something else. And then the platforming too, Kyle. I think the platforming for me, I know platforming has gotten a lot better in the last decade and a half, but for me, it was fun and it was fluid. The running, jumping, climbing, and hanging. Again, thinking like from the early Tomb Raider efforts, like this is what you guys meant by this. Adds a palpable sense of peril and danger too, just via the terrain, from the tangled up rainforests and the crawling with pirates, right, to the ancient temples riddled with booby traps and everything in between. Later on, the Nazi labs and some terrifying heights. There were some early on, especially, there were some real heart in your throat moments where you're climbing that that fortress,
Mm-hmm.
and you're hundreds of feet off the ground, and you feel it. You really feel a sense of like, oh shit, I don't want to fall. Which is a rare experience in a video game for me. Like I've played some great third person action, but to actually have that level of platforming where you felt your hands actually physically tingling, a few times, where it was, really fun. And again, the puzzle solving, light, not annoying. Just look at your journal, figure out what to do. Maybe you give it a couple of tries. Doesn't really break the momentum, doesn't really break the pace. And I liked that. And I liked going back and forth. They were very careful with, I felt, not getting boring, because after the puzzle solving, then you go back up to combat, then repeat, rinse and repeat. So I thought it was a lot of fun. I thought it was a really fun formula. And, there's little dimensions too, like with the combat, don't hide behind certain elements, behind certain terrain, because after it's shot or exploded with a grenade, that the crate or the stone wall is going to deteriorate. It's going to break. So you have to move. So there was just enough of those other things where, you could play around with grenades, stuff like that. There was just enough to play around with and experiment with, where, again, it wasn't overwhelming and it stayed fun. And I think that's got to be hard to design gameplay like that, because there's probably this flop sweat of wanting to squeeze too much in, and then you make it a little bit stressful for the player rather than something that's just smooth and free and easy. And I think I got that from this game.
The second thing I wanted to ask you about is the history in the game. How do you feel that the game executed on its historical story and its intrigue with the British explorers and Nathan Drake and his fake death and the ring and all of the rest? Were you intrigued by this?
Definitely. I mean, one of the things that I'm looking forward to is how they're going to play out the thing of Nathan, I guess, being a descendant of Sir Francis Drake, who was a real explorer, right? You probably learned about him in middle school, and the whole thing with the pirates also running for the treasure of El Dorado, which is like this historical thing that people thought was a man, then people thought it was a city, people thought it was a treasure. I don't know where they finally landed. Is it an empire? But this legendary mythical treasure of El Dorado. So tying in real things, tying in the Spanish and the conquistadors and the Nazis and their fascination with this sort of ancient stuff. I thought that was really cool. And then being able to play with it, being able to take liberties and say, okay, let's just make this a fun story. But that's the thing for me. I want to see Nathan's tie to this iconic, legendary explorer. And the other thing that I really enjoyed about the zombies, about those monster creatures, were that was sort of a parable in a way too, because those were supposedly the treasure-seeking Spaniards that ran afoul of this cursed treasure and were turned into these creatures, right? So it was another thing, like they suffered for their greed or whatever type of thing, but Nathan's doing the same shit. Nathan's
Definitely.
just the latest vestige of that. So it was kind of fun.
The third thing I wanted to ask was about the violence in the game. And Braxton Wilkerson wrote in and said, how do you guys feel about how many people Drake kills in this game? I mean, don't get me wrong, it was a ton of fun, but you kill hundreds of people. This would make him one of the most prolific mass murderers in the world, thoughts. So this is brought up all the time, and it's true. It's something that you can't avoid. It's funny because you have to kind of just suspend your disbelief. He is murdering these dudes. I mean, it's not really murder if they're coming after you. He's not like killing anyone in cold blood, but it is notable, and it's a weird balance that Naughty Dog kind of has to figure out throughout the games of being like, this is a happy-go-lucky guy doing his thing, finding his treasures, ring around his neck, and then he's blasting dudes with M6 grenade launchers, right? So I'm wondering how you felt about that balance of the action and the violence, and if it kind of stood out to you as something that was funny or that was unimmersive, or if it just kind of worked.
Yeah, I'm such a sensitive dude. I always think of stuff like this. It's automatically going to dawn on me. It's going to play into my experience. And there are just masses, countless hundreds of faceless, expendable pirate dudes getting mowed down at your behest. Like that's just what's happening here. And, it's funny in the amount of just not that the enemies respawn, you could actually clear areas, which I was happy to see. Like, there's a finite amount of pirates in each area and you have to mow them down, but there's a lot. As we said early on and have joked throughout the episode, there is a steep body count in this game. And I think because of that fun adventure serial tone and the personalities of the protagonists and that sort of lighthearted, I refuse to admit that I'm in danger sort of flavor to this game, I think that's what makes it work. Because this same type of thing where you're just taking bodies, every sort of chapter in this game, you're just taking dozens of dudes out. And I think it could get very dark had it not been for the tone of the game, where it's almost like you feel like it's supposed to be overlooked or something. It's like, or it's integrated as part of the fun. It's a little effed up when you think about it that way.
Yeah.
But because of the tone and but it's no different than Indiana Jones, knocking Nazi soldiers off of cliffs and, shooting the scimitar wielding dude in the bazaar. Like, it's no different. It's the same thing. It's played out in a funny tone. So it's lighthearted and jovial. But this game just pulls that off for me. Like, I just love that. It's the exact opposite. It flies in the face of something that's more serious, like, I don't know, like a BioShock game, right? Or, something like that, where it's, I think of BioShock Infinite, actually, where it's like much more serious, where you feel the damage that you wrought. You're really feeling that. You know what I mean? Where in this game, it's like, it's part of the fun.
Yeah, I know it totally is. This is one of the great challenges in game design, and no one knows the answer. I mean, obviously, no one knows the answer. It would have happened already, which is, how do you interact with these games without violence? And you don't. It's very rare. Even games like, and I really like Death Stranding a lot. I think it's a great game, actually. But even that game couldn't quite get away from the violence. Like, it's still, you're still fighting something. You're still shooting at something. And I played it in such a way where I shot as little as possible, because I was like, I want to just play a game where I'm not killing things if I can avoid it. Not because I really have any moralistic problem.
No, just because it's
boring.
refreshing.
Right. It's like the mechanic is the same, where we're killing the ghosts in Pac-Man, we're shooting the ships in space, or the aliens in Space Invaders, we're jumping on the mushrooms and the turtles in Mario, we're shooting the robots in Mega Man, we're whipping the skeletons in Castlevania. And so it's not really a new problem. I think one of the reasons why it's so encapsulated in this is because the game is so much better than a lot of the other stuff that was coming before it, that it started to bring into focus problems that need to be dealt with, which is, how do you kill less people? Like, I actually think, and I won't spoil it for you at all in story, but Uncharted 4 kind of does, as I recall, I only played it through once, but I was like, there's not a lot of combat in this. It feels, or it reminds me of The Last of Us Left Behind as well, the DLC for the first Last of Us, where there's very little fighting in that, which I loved. In fact, I wish that you got through the entire thing without fighting, because I think that would have been really daring. But I do like the weapon selection. Like you said, the gunplay is fine. The cover-based stuff is fine. Regenerative health is a choice that they made, which I think is
love that.
I love that too.
Do you like that?
Yes.
You like that mechanic?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it doesn't always work in every game. You have your Wolfensteins and everything where you have health, or Far Cry. But then you have games like Call of Duty where you're kind of, the insinuation, I've actually always heard it, and I think it might have been Amy Hennig that even described it like this, which is, as Drake is getting like hurt, in quotes, it's actually the bullets getting closer and closer. And like, it's supposed to be encapsulating that the killing blow is coming. the more you go, right? Like it's
That's
not supposed to necessarily be that you're getting hit with the bullets and stuff
I
like that.
didn't get that.
And I don't think all games are activated like that, but I think that that's kind of the intention, is to be like
I love
you're getting
that
hit.
idea. Even to try to incorporate something that thoughtful is really, yeah, she's something else.
Yeah, definitely.
Really,
So
that's really, really cool.
I think so too, because when you think about it, I think someone told me, I like shooting guns. I don't know a lot about them, but when you shoot a gun, by the time you hear it, the bullet's already in the ground, because like that's how fast it moves. So a lot of things are going on, and you
Yeah.
could imagine, not that I'm a sharpshooter, but you can imagine that you were going to miss more than you hit someone as you're emptying your gun, and so it's an interesting way for them to deal with it as well. But I think generally the focus on violence is funny. It's the focus throughout the series, but I think it's just a focus because you have to ask the question, like, do you want to have fun, or do you want to worry about why Nathan Drake has killed 1,000 people? I think people
Yeah.
have done videos where they've literally gone and tried to count, like, how many people does Nathan Drake kill in these games, and it's funny.
It
And
actually is funny. It comes out on the other side of funny, but it's a great conversation. And you know what, Kyle? It especially applies to, for me, and I know a lot of parents out there, just being a dad, just being a mom or a dad, being a parent. When you're, my son is 11, he'll be 12, your nephew. My daughter's 15. She's not really a gamer, but how it applies to them, because that's really where you're mindful of it. For myself, it's like I grew up playing video games. I get it. I'm not going to be a mass murderer. Like there's no danger in that. I see it as pure entertainment. I'm a good dude. I would never hurt anybody type of thing. But you do think about it for your kids, not that it's going to harm them in some psychological way, but just in hoping that they see it the same way, because they're of you, but they're not you, right?
sure.
Everybody's an individual. So, and just wanting to be protective of them and wanting them to be introduced to things in a timely fashion when they're ready. Graydon's already playing Fortnite, really into it, playing online with his friends. That's what he does. That's his main thing that he does socially with his friends. That's not in person. And it's a shooter. You know what I mean? That's what it is. So it is an interesting part of the conversation. And there are precious few games that deal with some sort of other primary mechanic besides, shooting, firing, killing, guns, all that kind of stuff. And I love shooters. I love first person shooters, third person shooters, but it is an interesting part of the conversation. And so many pirates are dying. All that's missing is the Wilhelm screams, man. There's so many pirates going down in this game. It's almost sad.
It is. It's you wonder about these guys, like well, I think Austin Powers gets in a little bit into that, like the henchmen, like who the henchmen are when you really think about it, which I think is funny. They actually cut that whole thing from the first movie, right? It was in the first movie, but they cut
it's in the extras. Yeah.
So it's like other people are thinking about this as well, but nonetheless, I think it's fun and it works. It's campy. And
this guy's a family of 5, but I'm just gonna mow him down anyway.
Right, and then his body's gonna disappear because there's not enough RAM to remember that it's there. So it's really quite.
Hope he drops a good gun.
Albert Hendrickson, I guess this is kind of like 3A as far as the questions I wanted to ask you, but he says, I am pretty sure that this is the Uncharted game that I played the most. I played when it came out, and then I platinumed it when trophies were patched in on the PS3. This is important to note. Trophies didn't exist when Uncharted came out. And the following year in 2008, it was patched for trophies.
2008, okay.
Right. So how do you feel about the difficulty? I personally think that its crushing mode can be cheap and somewhat unfair compared to later games in the series because of the monster closets and bad checkpointing. I'm sure you play it on normal. That's totally fine. That's how I usually play a game through the first time as well. Sometimes I'll play on hard. Crushing has to be unlocked. And I've beaten the game on crushing twice because I have the platinums for the games. What I recall is that there are some incredibly hard parts in this game, including the plane crash scene, which I remember being like where you're fighting guys, or when you get the map out of the plane and then you're kind of rappelling down the plane and fight in that forested arena. That's really difficult. I remember that part being really hard, but generally speaking,
is a hard part.
This game is decent enough at I think balance. If you want to go seek out the harder modes, they're there, but I think it was fine. I again, because I didn't play it for this one, I watched it because I haven't played it in years. I recall the first one and the third ones being the most annoying, and specifically in watching the gameplay, I was like, yeah, I remember this part being totally obnoxious. And I remember the on crushing, the first time you see the enemies when you're fighting with Raja on the circular platform is really difficult too. How did you feel? How did you find the difficulty?
Yeah, I've heard tales about crushing mode. I don't even know if I would go there at this point. I don't think I'm experienced enough. But yeah, normal difficulty, I'll be honest with you, I found it a little too easy. I think it's one of the things that detracted from the experience. One of the few problems that I think maybe is the most glaring problem is I thought on normal it was a little too easy, but that's very easily remedied. You just go up to the next difficulty level,
Yeah,
you know? But yeah, my experience on normal was I felt like the platforming was a little too forgiving, and there's really no cost for repeating the combat sections. Eventually, you're just going to get it. You know what I mean? You're going to start with the same amount of ammo. You start with the same weapons. You don't lose anything necessarily. In very rare cases did I drop a weapon and not be able to get it back if I wanted a specific loadout or whatever. So there was really no punishment. The punishment wasn't steep enough for repeating stuff. Even the quick time events, I was like, what is the purpose of this? I'm just going to keep doing it until I get it right,
right,
type
right,
of
right.
thing. So yeah, I found it a little too easy, maybe on
Interesting.
normal,
Yeah,
anyway.
that's interesting feedback. I don't think they wanted it to be. We played God of War, 2005's God of War recently, and that game I think has much more difficult, I would argue, ridiculous QTs in some of it. Of course, that is one of the games that popularized QT. In
That
this one,
that that was hard.
you're more like mashing triangle to the game. You have to let the game load. That's basically what they're doing, is trying to hide the loads. But
Exactly.
all right, I want to ask you about the music. Anthony C wrote in and said, "Hey, Moriarty Bros, just wanted to mention that Nate's theme is one of gaming's greatest tracks. It sounds so heroic and fits the adventurous nature of the series perfectly. Thank you, Colin, for letting me know on Discord, a Patreon perk, that I still had time to post this. Love listening to you guys. Have a great week." You're welcome, Anthony.
Oh, thank you. That's
Thank you for
sweet.
writing in. What did you think of the music? Nate's theme, of course, is incredibly well known, but I'm wondering how you felt about the audio accompaniment, which is iconic from this game.
So awesome, dude. It feels very epic and so appropriate for a grand adventure, right? Like John Williams for the indie movies. Hate to keep bringing up Indiana Jones.
No,
but
you
it
got it.
just
I mean,
works.
that's obvious.
It's just what you know what I mean. It's just at the same time though, the score. It's interesting, the music in this one for me. I really thought about this one for a while because the score at the same time is feeling John Williams-esque and big. It feels natural, it blends and it matches the visual atmosphere and the flavor of the game. And I guess just again in watching the making of stuff, the companion footage and stuff that goes along with this game, I guess there was a sort of philosophy with the overall audio, and it does make sense if I'm thinking about it, to share the billing, if you will, between the musical score and the environmental sound effects, which I thought was kind of a refreshing philosophy, right? So letting the sounds like the fluttering birds when you walk into an area, or the footsteps on the stone, or the rustling of the leaves, or the rushing water, to let that sort of come through too, and I think that balance between the music and the sound effects really makes for a distinctive and rich atmosphere, and it adds to the experience because the music comes in and out when it's important, and sometimes the sound effects take center stage. And that was really interesting, rather than have one work against the other or try to fit one in at a lower volume or something, or have them overlap. I like the big bombast of the musical movements, like the Nathan theme, and when it gets rousing like that. And then there's quiet moments where you just have like a stalactite dripping or something, like in the Nazi labs and stuff, echoing footsteps. And then you go back and forth between the music and the sound effects, and everything works in tandem. I thought that was the audio seemed like it didn't seem like an afterthought, like in some games. It seemed like a very mindful, very thoughtful thing. And also, it was really cool for me. I can't think of other games that do this, but obviously there are some where the musical cues let you know what's going on in the game. Like when an area is cleared of enemies, that little sting will play that it's clear, and you could go collect your ammunition and stuff like that. I liked, and it's almost like a Pavlovian thing where after a while you're like, oh, that keeps happening when all the enemies in the area. So it's like this reminder that it's okay to move forward. I love little things like that. It's like, again, things that work, the sound working in tandem with the gameplay. Super, super cool. Like everything feels so lovingly crafted.
Definitely. And I feel like the sound, or lack thereof, is brought to bear in that really great scene where Elena's running and she almost runs into the spike trap with one of Raja's men on it. And Drake says at that point something like that, there's no sound, like we're being watched. And they take a good advantage of the sound there. You're kind of getting conditioned by that point to hear the birds, to hear the stone falling in the water, and occasionally you fall into a pit and die, and you hear "Nay!" from Sully.
Yeah.
So,
Sometimes over and over
right.
again.
Oh my God. All right. Ari Levi wrote in and said, "Hey, Brothers M. I played games on
Yo.
the PS2 when I was little, but my deeper love of gaming came in the PS3 generation, and Uncharted Drake's Fortune was the game that set that passion in motion. I had never played a game so cinematic with characters that felt so real. There's a certain magic to the banter Nate has with Sully and Elena during gameplay, something that now seems to be a staple amongst all of PlayStation's games. How important do you think Drake's Fortune was in shaping the future style of Sony's first-party catalog?" So as we wrap up, and it's something I kind of said in the beginning, but I want to reiterate, is that you can all lines draw back to this game, all of them. And when you see the games that were greenlit after that and what came of it, this was the game that proved that Sony had this new archetype moving forward. You can say that God of War and God of War 2, both of which came out before this, were kind of a step in that direction. You can also argue that there were third-party games around this time, like Heavenly Sword and second-party games like Heavenly Sword and others that were going down this action route. But I would argue that this particular feel, this particular look, this particular groundedness, and all of the rest is exactly what Sony first party is known for. And I don't think anyone considered Naughty Dog the best studio in the world before this game. And I think that it was this game, and specifically Uncharted 2, that made them. I like Uncharted 3 better, and we'll get to that, but a lot of people like Uncharted 2 better. And I think it was around then when people kind of understood this is what it is. And it's a hard thing to replicate. I mean, it's very well known that they had a hard time making Uncharted 4, that it drove Amy Hennig out of the studio, that she hasn't released a game since Uncharted 3, right? And she'll come to, and she's doing her thing. The Star Wars game got canceled and all the rest that she was working on when she was at Visceral and all the rest. So she'll come back. And I think she might have some writing credits on that game Forspoken that's coming out soon, although I don't know for sure. It's a PlayStation 5 game from Square Enix, but
oh, that's cool.
It's
just
hard,
as a writer.
Right. It's hard to do this. And it can't be understated when it was called Project Big in its development. Again, just how much of a massive move this was to have people work on a game like this, and you just didn't know. And PS3 was just in desperate straits at this time. And it's the fat PS3 era, $600. It's really more like the $500 PS3 era, but it was difficult. That you needed a draw, and this game was a draw. And the other thing that I want to say in closing, and I'll throw it over to you, and you can say whatever you need to say, is just, it reminds me that games don't have to be very long to be very impactful. I love open world games. I love spending lots and lots of times with games. I spent 100 hours with Far Cry 6. I played Returnal for 80 hours. But I don't always want that. And I think a AAA slickly made game like this doesn't have to be much more than what this one is. And the other Uncharted games get a little longer. They certainly get more polished, but if this game came out today, people would be like, it's too short. And that's too bad, because it might be one of the reasons why Naughty Dog, or why Sony, because I'm sure another studio would probably do it, is why they haven't remade it, because I think it's just too short. And
that's so interesting.
That's too bad, because it's really not too short. So that's what I want to say. What do you think, Dave, in closing?
Well, that's an interesting place to start. I mean, isn't there room for everything though? If you want something if you want something long, you play The Last of Us, right? If you want something shorter, you play one of the Uncharted games. And then, I would think, I guess the way people are looking at it is a little bit of squeezing as much quantity into a $60, $70, $80 game, right? They want that bang for their buck. And that automatically equivocates to length, right? You think about, I'm getting the most for my dollar because this is a long game. I wonder if that's part of the conversation as somebody who's not, an avid contemporary gamer, although I'd love to be, and I'm playing more and more. But I wonder if that's a part of it. And I would just think from the outset that there's room for a little bit of everything. What I love about this game is that there is so much bang for your buck within a short time. And I think that's probably, I would argue, although I don't make games, I would think that's a harder game to make, to squeeze this much into, let's say, 10 hours, rather than say, okay, we got 40 hours. We could put everything and the kitchen sink into this, right? We have to make this a thoughtful, fun, well-paced journey, and we only have this much time. So I think that's kind of a feat. And I really loved my experience. And the thing about it is that it's quality from A to Z. Yes, it's a legendary franchise. Everybody knows it. But I didn't even realize how important and influential this specific game was, this initial outing. But in looking at this game overall, it has everything. It really does for me. It has characters, great characters that are memorable, awesome gameplay that I found really fun, story, graphics, and animation that were really ahead of their time. I know the artists and the developers at Naughty Dog credit that largely to the PS3, or rather, I should say, the evolution from the PS2 to the PS3, where they were going from, it was just they had so much more horsepower to deal with graphically and for the animation and the music. Everything is so thoughtful. It's such a thoughtful package, and it's such a satisfying experience and something I get to benefit from doing Knockback is like, especially the fan voted topics. I appreciate them so much because when something's so storied and talked about and beloved as the Uncharted series, and then you kind of get to experience it yourself and you're like, oh yeah, I totally get it. Like everybody's completely right. I don't know what I'm always thinking. I don't know why I go into it thinking like, you're always thinking like, all right, arms crossed. How great can this be? Come on, guys,
Right, of
give me
course.
a break.
Yeah,
and then you experience it and you're like, oh shit. Yeah. This is amazing. So that's so fun. And I don't think I've had the experience on Knockback where I haven't felt that, but this might be one of the most dynamic instances of that where it's like, oh yeah, like especially this being the fledgling outing, it's like I can't wait to crack into number 2 and number 3 and number 4. So it's been a lot of fun. Again, like a game I'm sorry to have to put away. We got an epic game coming up that I have to spend a lot of time with. So you got to kind of move on. But I'll be looking back to, visiting the second iteration now.
Right on, man. Well, is there anything else left unsaid that you wanted to say before we pull it over to you for a dad joke, or you're ready to execute?
Yeah, man. You know what I thought of in all this? What makes it so fascinating for us, right? We're thinking about treasure hunters, right? Any story about treasure hunters, vampire hunters, Nazi hunters, bounty hunters.
Bounty hunters, yeah.
There's just something so fascinating about hunters, right? It's almost like you can't go wrong.
No,
right?
You can't. It's good
Especially
stuff.
treasure hunters, I would argue for sure. Was there anything else that I wanted to say? No, that was the other thing. The ratio of positives to negatives in this game. The biggest negative I could come up with, besides the difficulty, I've thought, but again, just ratchet it up to the next difficulty level, was the grenades were. I don't know how you guys, or Kyle, if you agree with me, you guys and girls out there, but the grenades were completely useless. The blast radius is so small, right? You could, if somebody was hiding behind one of those breakable background environmental elements, like a stone wall or shipping crate, I guess you could explode it to get them out of cover. But besides that, you were not. I don't think I killed one person in 16 hours with a grenade, and I tried. And these pirates are down to die. We know that.
You're right. They're not. They have no self-preservation.
The grenades were just. They were just
interesting,
horrendous. I couldn't believe they were even in the game. It was like, what is even happening right now? All right, my friend. Yeah, let's move on to the dad joke. That was fun. Oh yeah, this is a good one. Brought to us today, Kyle, by our friend Zach F. via, I believe, Instagram. Kyle, it's been months since I ordered the book How to Scam People Online. It still hasn't arrived yet.
Pretty good stuff.
Not bad. Good.
Yeah, not bad at all.
I feel like Zach could have made that one up.
He might have. Someone has to make all these things up. I always think about that. Like, who made this up? Like we were
it's
talking
good,
about,
but it feels homemade.
Like we were talking about the story about how everyone in high school knew someone who knew someone that got a hot dog stuck in their vagina.
Have you ever talked about that on any of your podcasts?
No, not with anyone else. Just me and you.
Amazing.
Why is that? I don't know what that's all about.
I mean, I know what it is. You know what it is, right? We talked about this, right?
No,
what really happened was the girl got pregnant. But I don't know why, and that's why, because to avoid that embarrassment for her family, I think that's what it is.
Interesting.
But I don't know why would it have to be something so far-fetched and widely used as the hot dog / sometimes frozen hot dog story? It would have
So
to
weird.
probably be a frozen.
Yeah, let's
Stop.
all right.
Sorry.
Well,
if there's children in the room. And sorry if you were barbecuing tonight.
Yeah, well, it's fine. I don't get grossed out by stuff, so it's just like, whatever, man, I'm gonna eat. All right, well, adios, assholes. It was good to talk to you all about Uncharted and Drake's Fortune. And it's available on PS3 and PS4 if you want to check it out. You should, if you haven't played it. Hopefully you haven't listened to this without having played it. Thank you all for your kindness, love, and support on Patreon, patreon.com/laststandmedia. Leave us nice reviews on iTunes and other places if you can. We appreciate it. Tell your friends and family about the show. And we'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye. KnockBack, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show was conceived by and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Dagan Moriarty. KnockBack's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including KnockBack, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.